If you're going to kill a king, you shouldn't hesitate. The thought pressed hard against Elena Voss's ribs as she stood in the dim glow of a single oil lamp, her breath shallow, her fingers steady despite the storm rising inside her chest, the cold stone floor beneath her bare feet grounding her in a moment that would decide everything, because just 6 feet away, the most feared Alpha King in the Northern Territory slept, Kieran Blackthorne, the man whose name was spoken in lowered voices and careful glances, the man she had crossed 3 state lines and risked everything to find, the man she had sworn to destroy, and yet as she watched him now, still and silent beneath dark linen sheets, something felt wrong, not weaker, not safer, but different than the stories carved into her memory, because monsters weren't supposed to look this calm, weren't supposed to breathe this evenly, weren't supposed to carry a presence that filled the entire room even in sleep, and yet he did, and it made her hesitate for half a second too long, her grip tightening around the small silver blade hidden against her palm, the edge catching just enough light to remind her why she was here, why she couldn't falter, why this moment mattered more than her fear, more than the strange pull tightening low in her chest every time she looked at him, a pull she refused to name, refused to understand, because it didn't belong here, not tonight, not when she had come with one purpose and one purpose only, to end him before he could ruin anyone else's life the way he had ruined hers, or so she had believed, her heartbeat counting down like a clock she could no longer silence, one step closer, then another, her shadow stretching across the floor until it reached the edge of his bed, until her presence should have disturbed him, should have woken him, but it didn't, and that unsettled her more than anything, because men like Kieran Blackthorne were never unguarded, never unaware. And yet here he was, exposed in a way that felt almost intentional, as if he had been waiting, as if he had known, and the thought made her throat tighten as she lifted her hand, the blade hovering just inches above him, the distance so small now it should have been easy, it should have been simple, it should have been done already, but her body betrayed her, her instincts rebelling in ways she couldn't explain, a strange warmth spreading through her chest, down her arm, into her fingertips, making the air between them feel charged, alive, wrong, because this wasn't fear, it wasn't doubt, it was something deeper, something older, something that made her pulse stutter and her breath catch just as his eyes opened without warning, sharp and clear and impossibly aware, locking onto hers in an instant that shattered every plan she had made, every certainty she had clung to, and in that single look, Elena understood one terrifying truth, she had never been the hunter in this room, not even for a second. Elena's breath caught in her throat, not because he had moved, but because he had not, because Kieran Blackthorne did not flinch, did not reach for her wrist, did not even shift beneath the blade hovering above him, and that stillness was more unsettling than any reaction she had prepared for, his silver eyes holding hers with a quiet intensity that made the air feel thinner, heavier, as if the entire room had narrowed down to the space between them, to the fragile distance where intention should have become action, yet somehow did not, and she hated that her hand would not move, that her pulse betrayed her, racing faster now not with fear alone but with something she could not name, something that tightened low in her chest every time his gaze searched her face as though he recognized her, as though he had been expecting her all along, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady, not startled, not angry, but certain in a way that sent a quiet shock through her spine. "You took longer than I thought you would," and the words landed wrong, not like an accusation, not like a threat, but like a statement that had already been accepted long before this moment, and Elena forced herself to breathe, forced herself to remember why she was here, to hold on to the image she had carried for years, the stories of destruction, of power used without mercy, of a king who left nothing but silence in his wake, and yet nothing in front of her matched that image, nothing aligned with the certainty she had built her life around, and that fracture, that single crack in her belief, was dangerous, more dangerous than any guard or weapon could ever be, because doubt slowed her, and hesitation gave him control, and she refused to give him that, not now, not when she had come this far, her fingers tightening around the blade as she steadied her voice. "Then you should not have let me get this close," but even as she said it, she knew the words were hollow, because nothing about this felt like luck, nothing about this felt like she had slipped past his defenses unnoticed, and the faintest shift in his expression, barely there, almost a shadow of a smile, told her he knew it too. "If I did not want you here, you would not be standing there," he replied, calm and unshaken, as if the outcome of this moment had never truly been in question for him, and that realization sent a flicker of something sharp through her chest, something dangerously close to anger, because she had not survived this long by being predictable, by being easy to read, and yet he looked at her like he already understood every choice she had made, every step she had taken to reach him, and she refused to let that stand, refused to be seen so clearly by the very man she had sworn to erase, her hand lowering just enough for the blade to brush the air above his chest, a silent warning she needed him to take seriously. But instead of resisting, instead of pushing her away, Kieran did something she had not prepared for at all. He sat up slowly, deliberately, closing the distance between them without breaking eye contact, and in that single movement, the balance shifted completely, because now it was not her stepping into his space, it was him stepping into hers, his presence overwhelming in a way that made her instincts flare, every sense sharpening at once, the subtle warmth in the air returning stronger than before, pulling at her in a way that made her grip tighten again, not to strike, but to hold on to control she could feel slipping through her fingers, and then, quietly, almost gently, he said, "You came to end me, Elena Voss, but you should have asked yourself one question first," his voice lowering just enough to send a quiet tremor through her thoughts. "What happens when the one you were meant to destroy recognizes you before you recognize him?" The sound of her name in his voice did not feel like discovery, it felt like confirmation, like something inevitable had just stepped into place, and Elena's mind raced to catch up with a reality she had not prepared for, because there was no possible way he should know who she was, not like this, not without hesitation or doubt, and yet there it was, spoken with a certainty that stripped away the thin layer of control she had been holding onto, her fingers tightening instinctively around the blade even as her instincts screamed that this moment was no longer hers to command, that something deeper, something older, had already begun to unfold beneath the surface of everything she believed, and she forced herself to speak, her voice steady only because she refused to let it break. "You are wrong." But the words felt hollow even to her, because nothing about the way he looked at her suggested uncertainty, nothing about his presence hinted at a mistake, and the faint shift of his gaze, the way his eyes softened just slightly as if recognizing something fragile beneath her defenses, made her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "No," he said quietly, and the calm in his tone carried more weight than any denial she could offer. "I have been waiting for you longer than you have been searching for me," and the words struck deeper than they should have, slipping past her defenses before she could stop them, because waiting implied knowledge, and knowledge implied a truth she had never considered, one that threatened to unravel everything she thought she understood, and she shook her head once, sharply, as if the motion could push the thought away, could force reality back into something she could control. "I did not come here to listen to you," she said, but even as she spoke, her hand lowered slightly, the blade no longer positioned for a strike but suspended in uncertainty, caught between intention and something far more dangerous, hesitation, and Kieran noticed, of course he noticed, because nothing about him suggested carelessness, nothing about him suggested weakness, and yet instead of pressing the advantage, instead of disarming her or calling for guards or asserting the authority she knew he possessed, he simply remained where he was. Close enough now that she could feel the subtle warmth radiating from him, close enough that the strange pull inside her grew stronger, sharper, like a thread tightening with every breath she took, and it made her pulse quicken for reasons she refused to acknowledge, reasons she refused to understand, because this was not supposed to happen, not here, not now, not with him, and yet it was undeniable, and that made it dangerous, far more dangerous than any weapon she could hold. "Then why are you still standing here?" he asked softly. Not as a challenge, but as a question she could not easily dismiss. And she had no answer for that, not one that made sense, not one that explained why her body refused to move, why her instincts pulled her closer instead of pushing her away, why the line between enemy and something else had begun to blur in a way that left her unsteady, and the silence stretched just long enough for her to feel it, the shift, the moment something unseen settled into place between them, subtle but undeniable, like the first breath before a storm, and when it came, it was not loud or overwhelming, it was quiet, almost gentle, a sudden awareness that wrapped around her senses, tightening around her chest, her pulse, her thoughts, until she could not ignore it anymore, and her breath caught as she realized what it was, what it meant, the truth she had spent her entire life denying without even knowing it existed, and Kieran's voice followed, low and certain, as if he had felt it too. "There it is," he murmured, his gaze never leaving hers. "You feel it now," and Elena did not want to answer, did not want to acknowledge the truth pressing against her ribs, but she could not deny the way her heartbeat aligned with something beyond her control, something that had nothing to do with her mission and everything to do with him, and for the first time since stepping into this room, she understood that ending him might not be the hardest thing she would have to face, accepting what bound them together would be. Elena felt it settle deeper, not like a sudden force but like something that had always been there, something that had been waiting beneath her skin for the exact moment to surface, and the realization made her step back instinctively, creating space between them as if distance could undo what had just happened, as if she could outrun the quiet certainty now threading through her pulse. But it followed her, steady and unrelenting, and she hated it, hated the way her body responded to him. Without permission, hated the way her thoughts began to fracture under the weight of a truth she had never agreed to carry. "No," she said, sharper this time, more force behind it as she tried to reclaim control. "This is not real." But even as the words left her, she knew they were not enough, because nothing about this felt imagined, nothing about this felt like something she could simply ignore, and Kieran did not argue, did not push. He only watched her with that same steady gaze, as if he understood the war unfolding inside her, as if he had already seen this moment play out long before she ever stepped into his room. "You can deny it," he said quietly, "but your instincts will not," and the calm certainty in his voice sent another ripple through her chest, sharper this time, because instincts were something she trusted, something she had relied on to survive when nothing else made sense, and now those same instincts were turning against her, pulling her toward the very man she had sworn to destroy, and it felt like betrayal, not just of her mission, but of everything she believed about herself, about the choices she had made, and the reason she had come here in the first place. Her grip tightening again around the blade as if it could anchor her, as if it could remind her of something solid, something real. "You think this changes anything," she said, her voice lower now, steadier, built on the fragile edge of determination. "It does not," and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not doubt, not surprise, but something quieter, something that looked almost like understanding, and that unsettled her more than anger ever could have, because she did not want him to understand her, did not want him to see through the walls she had built so carefully over the years, walls that had kept her focused, kept her moving forward when everything else tried to pull her back. "You still came here to end me," he said. Not as a question, but as a fact, and she nodded once, because that was the one thing she could not let go of, the one truth she refused to let this connection rewrite. "Yes," she answered, her voice steady now, grounded in the only certainty she had left, and for a brief moment, silence stretched between them again, heavy but not hostile, charged with something neither of them spoke aloud, until Kieran exhaled slowly, the sound almost quiet enough to miss, and then he did something that shifted everything once more. He stepped back, creating space where there had been none, releasing the pressure of his presence just enough for her to breathe again, and that alone confused her, because if he truly believed what he was saying, if he truly felt what she felt, why would he let her go? Why would he not take control of the situation, assert the power she knew he had? And the question must have shown in her expression, because his gaze softened just slightly as he answered it. "Without her asking, because this is not something I force," he said, and the quiet weight of those words settled heavily between them. "Not even now," and that broke something in her expectations, because nothing in the stories she had been told painted him as a man who chose restraint, nothing in her past suggested he would give her the freedom to walk away, and yet here he was, doing exactly that, and it left her standing there, blade still in hand, caught between the life she had built on vengeance and the truth now unfolding in front of her, a truth that refused to fit into anything she had ever known. And as the silence stretched once more, Elena realized with a quiet, unsettling clarity that this was no longer just about whether she could end him, it was about whether she could walk away from something that felt like it had already chosen her. Elena did not lower the blade, but she did not move forward either, and that was the moment she knew something had already shifted beyond her control, because hesitation had never been part of who she was, not in moments like this, not when the outcome mattered, and yet here she stood, balanced on a line she could not clearly see anymore, her breath steady but her thoughts anything but. The quiet space he had given her now stretching wider than the distance between them, forcing her to face something she had been avoiding since the second he opened his eyes, because walking away should have been simple, it should have been instinct, it should have been survival, and yet her feet did not move, her body refusing to follow the logic her mind tried to impose, and that alone was enough to unsettle her more than anything he had said, more than the way he had spoken her name like it belonged to him. More than the undeniable pull still tightening with every passing second, and she forced herself to breathe through it, to find something solid to hold on to, something real, and her gaze flickered briefly to the room around them, searching for anything that could anchor her, anything that could remind her why she was here. But instead she noticed something she had not allowed herself to see before, the absence of chaos, the absence of the darkness she had been told would surround a man like him, the quiet order of the space, the stillness that felt deliberate rather than oppressive. And it made her chest tighten again, because none of it matched the image she had built for years, none of it aligned with the story she had been given, and doubt crept in where certainty had once lived, subtle but dangerous, and she hated that more than anything, because doubt weakened resolve, and resolve was the only thing she could not afford to lose. "You are trying to confuse me," she said finally, her voice controlled but edged with something sharper now, something closer to frustration. Then fear, and for the first time, Kieran's gaze shifted slightly, not away from her, but inward, as if he were considering something beyond the immediate moment, something deeper than her accusation, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a quiet weight that settled into the space between them. "No," he said, "I am giving you the chance to see clearly," and that struck something in her she was not ready to face, because clarity meant truth, and truth meant questioning everything she had believed, everything she had built her life around, and she was not ready for that, not here, not now, not with him standing in front of her like he already knew the outcome of a decision she had not yet made, and the thought sparked something defensive in her, something that pushed back against the pull, against the connection, against the quiet certainty he seemed to carry so effortlessly. "I do not need your truth," she replied, her grip tightening again as she lifted the blade slightly, not enough to strike, but enough to remind herself of the line she had drawn long before this moment, the line she could not allow herself to cross. "I only need one thing," and for a second, the air shifted again, tension threading through it in a different way now, sharper, more defined, because this was the moment she had come for, the moment she had prepared for, and she could feel it building, the decision pressing in on her from all sides, demanding action, demanding resolution. And yet even now, even standing here with nothing left between them but choice, her body resisted, her instincts pulling her in two directions at once, one toward the purpose that had brought her here, and one towards something far more uncertain, something that felt less like a choice and more like something already decided, and Kieran saw it, of course he saw it, the conflict she could not hide, the fracture in her certainty, and instead of stepping forward, instead of forcing the moment to resolve, he did the one thing she had not expected. He waited, completely still, completely unguarded, as if he trusted her to decide, as if he believed she already knew what she would do, and that quiet confidence unsettled her more than any threat could have, because it left her alone with the truth she could no longer ignore, that this was no longer just about ending him, it was about choosing which part of herself she was willing to lose to do it. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have, not empty, not still, but filled with something pressing against Elena's senses, something that refused to let her retreat into certainty, and she realized with a quiet, unsettling clarity that the longer she stood here, the harder it became to separate truth from what she had been told, because nothing about this moment aligned with the man she had come to destroy, nothing about him matched the image she had carried across miles and years of quiet anger, and that fracture widened with every second he chose not to act, not to dominate, not to force an outcome, and that restraint, that deliberate choice to give her space, began to feel more powerful than any display of strength she had imagined, because it placed the decision entirely in her hands, and she was not ready for that, not when every instinct she trusted had turned uncertain, her breath steadying as she forced herself to focus, to remember, to anchor herself in something that could not shift beneath her, and she closed her eyes for just a fraction of a second, pulling back into memory, into the night that had set her on this path, the voices, the fear, the stories whispered like warnings carved into bone, all pointing to one name, one man, one truth she had never questioned until now, and when she opened her eyes again, there was something sharper in her gaze, something more grounded, because doubt might have entered her thoughts, but it had not erased what brought her here. "You expect me to believe everything I have heard is wrong," she said, her voice quieter now but steadier, built on something deeper than anger, something closer to resolve, and Kieran did not answer immediately, his gaze holding hers as if weighing the words she had not spoken, the questions she was not ready to ask, and when he finally spoke, it was not defensive, not dismissive, but measured in a way that carried more weight than denial ever could. "I expect you to question who gave you those truths," he said, and the simplicity of it struck harder than she expected, because it shifted the focus, not onto him, but onto everything she had accepted without hesitation, everything she had built her purpose around, and that made something inside her tighten again, not fear, not anger, but resistance, because questioning that meant unraveling more than just a mission. It meant unraveling a part of herself she had relied on to survive, and she was not ready to lose that. Not yet. That does not change what I came here to do, she replied, but the conviction in her voice no longer rang as clear as it had before, and she heard it, felt it, the slight fracture that betrayed the certainty she was trying to hold on to, and Kieran noticed it too. Of course he did, but instead of pressing it, instead of using it to his advantage, he did something far more unsettling. He stepped past her, slow and deliberate, not turning his back in carelessness, but in trust. As if he already knew she would not strike, and the movement pulled at something deep inside her, something instinctive that made her turn without thinking, her body reacting before her mind could catch up, because watching him walk away felt wrong in a way she could not explain, like something unfinished was slipping through her grasp, and he stopped just short of the doorway, his presence still commanding even without facing her, his voice carrying back to her, low and certain. If you are going to end this, he said, then do it knowing the truth, not the story you were given. And the words lingered in the air long after he finished speaking, settling into the space between them, into the space inside her that had begun to shift whether she wanted it to or not. And Elena stood there, blade still in hand, her heartbeat no longer racing with urgency but with something far more dangerous, hesitation rooted in possibility, and for the first time since this began, she realized that the hardest part of this was no longer finding the strength to act, it was deciding what the truth actually was before she did. The door remained closed, yet everything about the room felt as though it had shifted, as if the air itself had changed direction the moment Kieran turned away from her, and Elena stood frozen in place, her grip on the blade loosening just enough for her to feel the tremor she had been suppressing finally surface, not from fear, not from weakness, but from the weight of a choice she could no longer delay, because walking away now would not erase what had just happened, it would not silence the questions that had begun to take root in her mind, and it would not undo the connection that pulsed quietly beneath her skin, steady and undeniable, and that realization pressed harder against her chest than any threat ever had, forcing her to confront something she had spent years avoiding, the possibility that she had been guided here not by truth, but by something carefully constructed, something designed to lead her to this exact moment, and the thought ignited something sharp inside her, something that cut through the confusion with sudden clarity, because if there was even a chance that her purpose had been built on something false, then ending him now would not be justice, it would be a mistake she could never undo, and that was something she could not accept, her breath steadying as she straightened slightly, her gaze locking onto his back as he stood near the doorway, still and composed as if he had all the time in the world, as if he already knew she would not leave, and that quiet certainty sparked a flicker of defiance in her, because she refused to be predictable, refused to let him control the outcome simply by waiting, and before she could second-guess herself, her voice cut through the silence, clear and deliberate, turn around, and for a brief moment, nothing happened, the stillness holding just long enough for her to feel the weight of what she had just done, because this was no longer the path she had planned, this was something else entirely, something uncertain and dangerous in a way she had never prepared for. And then slowly, without hesitation, Kieran turned to face her again, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp with something that felt almost like expectation, and Elena met his gaze without looking away. Her posture steadier now, her resolve reshaped but not broken. If I am going to make a decision, she said, her voice lower but stronger than before, then I need more than your words, and the statement hung between them, not a demand, not quite a challenge, but something close enough to both that it shifted the balance once again, because now she was no longer reacting, she was choosing, and that alone changed everything, and Kieran seemed to recognize it, the subtle shift in his expression. Enough to tell her that he understood what she was asking for, not blind trust, not empty reassurance, but truth, something real, something she could measure against everything she had believed, and for the first time since this began, something in his posture softened, not weaker, but more open, as if he had been waiting for this moment as much as she had been avoiding it. Then you will have it, he said, his voice steady, carrying a quiet promise that settled into the space between them. But understand this, he added, taking a single step closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough to remind her of the connection that still lingered between them. Once you see it, you will not be able to go back to who you were before, and the words landed with a weight that made her pulse quicken again, because deep down, she already knew that was true, she had felt it the moment his eyes met hers, the moment everything began to shift, and yet she did not step back, did not retreat. Because whatever came next, whatever truth he was about to reveal, it was something she needed to face, not as the person she had been when she walked into this room, but as the person she was becoming now, someone standing at the edge of a choice that would define everything that followed. And for the first time since this began, Elena lowered the blade just enough to show that she was ready to listen, even if she was not ready to believe. Kieran did not speak immediately, and that silence felt intentional, as if he were allowing the weight of her choice to settle fully before he moved forward, and when he finally did, it was not with urgency or force, but with a calm precision that made Elena's attention sharpen instinctively, her senses tracking every subtle shift in his posture, every measured step he took as he crossed the room, not toward her, but past her, toward a narrow table positioned against the far wall, and for a moment she did not understand what he was doing, her grip still firm around the blade even as she watched him reach for something resting in the shadows, something small enough to fit in his hand, and when he turned back to face her, there was no tension in his expression, no sign of deception, only a quiet certainty that made her chest tighten again, because whatever he was about to show her, he believed it would change everything, and that alone made her pulse quicken, her body bracing for something she could not yet see. "You were told I destroyed your family," he said, his voice even, not defensive, not dismissive, but grounded in something that felt unshakable, and the words hit exactly where he intended, because they struck at the core of everything that had brought her here, everything she had never questioned, and she did not respond, did not interrupt, because for the first time, she needed to hear this, needed to understand what he would say before she decided what to believe, and Kieran seemed to recognize that, because he continued without hesitation, lifting the object slightly so it caught the dim light, revealing a simple ring, worn but carefully preserved, its surface marked by a faint engraving she could not fully make out from where she stood, and something about it stirred a distant memory, something buried deep enough that she had almost forgotten it existed, and that alone made her take a single step forward, not consciously, not deliberately, but because something inside her needed to see it more clearly. "This was found the night your family disappeared," he said, his gaze never leaving hers as he held it out just enough for her to recognize the shape, the detail, the familiarity that made her breath catch before she could stop it, because she knew that ring, not from stories, not from hearsay, but from memory, from a time before everything had fallen apart, before she had been left with nothing but fragments and questions that had never been answered, and the realization hit slowly at first, then all at once, unraveling something she had held onto for years, because that ring had never belonged to Kieran, it had never been connected to him, it had belonged to someone else, someone she had trusted, someone she had never once considered as part of the truth she had been given, and the ground beneath her certainty shifted again, deeper this time, more dangerous, because now it was not just doubt, it was contradiction, a fracture in the very foundation of everything she believed, and she shook her head slightly, as if trying to steady herself against it, trying to find something solid to hold onto, but the more she looked at the ring, the clearer it became, the harder it was to deny what it represented, and Kieran saw it, saw the moment it clicked into place, the moment her certainty began to break under the weight of something real, something undeniable. "Your family was not destroyed by me," he said quietly, not with anger, not with frustration, but with a truth that carried no need for force. "They were betrayed from within," and the words settled into the silence between them, heavy and irreversible, and Elena felt it, felt the shift complete itself in a way she could not undo, because this was not something she could ignore, not something she could dismiss, this was something that demanded to be faced, and for the first time since she had stepped into this room. The blade in her hand no longer felt like certainty, it felt like a question she was no longer sure how to answer. The ring did not feel heavy in Kieran's hand, but it weighed on Elena like something far greater than metal and memory, something that pressed against her chest and refused to let her breathe the same way she had just moments before, because the truth it carried was not loud or dramatic, it was quiet, precise, and devastating in its simplicity, and that made it impossible to ignore. Her eyes fixed on the engraving she now recognized completely, the symbol she had once traced with her fingers. As a child, a mark she had believed was lost along with everything else, and yet here it was, not in the ruins of her past, not buried in the story she had been told, but standing in front of her as proof that something had never aligned the way she thought it did, and her hand lowered fully now, the blade no longer suspended between them but resting at her side, forgotten in the face of something far more important, because this was no longer about action, this was about understanding, and understanding demanded more from her than she had ever been prepared to give. "Why do you have this?" she asked, her voice quieter now, not weakened, but stripped of the certainty that had once defined it, and Kieran did not hesitate, did not soften the answer or reshape it into something easier to accept, because I was there after, he said, and the weight of those words settled immediately, not as a threat, not as a confession, but as a continuation of a truth she was only beginning to see, not to destroy, he added, his gaze steady, but to find out who had already done it. And something inside her shifted again, deeper this time, because that aligned with nothing she had been told, nothing she had been trained to believe, and yet the evidence stood in front of her, undeniable and real, and it forced her to confront the possibility she had resisted from the beginning, that her entire path had been guided by someone else's design, someone else's version of events. And the realization did not come with anger, not yet, it came with something colder, something sharper. The slow awareness that she had been used, and that awareness cut deeper than any betrayal she had imagined, her breath steadying again as she lifted her gaze to meet his, no longer as an enemy standing before a target, but as someone standing at the edge of a truth she could not step away from. Then why did you let me come this far? She asked, and this time there was no accusation in her voice, only a need to understand something that no longer felt simple, and Kieran held her gaze without hesitation, the answer already there before he spoke it, because you would not have believed anything less, he said, and the honesty in it struck harder than anything else he had said tonight, because it was true. She would not have listened, would not have questioned, would not have stopped, not without seeing this for herself, and that realization settled into her with a quiet finality, because it meant this moment had always been inevitable, not because of him, but because of her, because of the choices she had made based on something she had never verified, and now she stood here, faced with the consequences of that, with the truth that changed everything, and the connection she could no longer deny, the one that pulsed quietly between them, no longer a distraction, no longer something to resist, but something that had become part of the reality she now had to face, and for a long moment, neither of them moved, the silence no longer tense, no longer uncertain, but filled with something new, something that felt less like conflict and more like the beginning of something neither of them had planned. And Elena understood then, with a clarity that settled deep in her chest, that she had not come here to end him, not in the way she had believed. She had come here to uncover something that would change the course of everything that followed, and as her fingers slowly loosened around the blade, letting it slip from her grasp without sound, she met his gaze fully, not as a hunter, not as a threat, but as someone who had finally stepped into the truth she could no longer deny. And in that moment, the choice she made was not spoken, but it was understood, not just by her, but by him as well, because some decisions did not need words, they only needed the courage to be accepted.